I think we'll get started. If you could please sit down. And I think what we have here is something a little more casual. And Nick, could you give me a thumbs up if you hear me okay? Good, thank you. Something a little more casual. It's a nice cross-section across from Sacramento all the way down to a smaller retailer, and really a roundtable discussion on legislative issues today in California within the water industry. And, well, the big Ed in the room, I guess I'll start with Ed. You see Ed behind me. Ed Manning he's a registered lobbyist. He's also an attorney. He works for KP Public Affairs, and he's been the legislative advocate for Mojave Water Agency for many years, a real trusted advocate of ours, and very knowledgeable on how things go in Sacramento. Ed wanted to be here, but couldn't due to scheduling constraints, and so we did the next best thing. We're trying to keep up with technology, and so we've brought Ed in, I guess, virtually. And so Ed will be in the discussion, and Ed Manning is right behind us here. Next to my left, we have Jolene Walsh. Jolene is with Eastern Municipal Water District. She's been there for 17 years. One thing I know about Jolene that's not in her bio is she can identify a garnet mica schist because she's also a trained geologist. So maybe garnet mica schist is too much of an inside joke, but it's got some very identifiable minerals, and I know there's some rock hounds out in this group. So, but Jolene is the Senior Director for Government Affairs for Eastern Municipal Water District. And I think Jolene's an interesting bridge between our next person, Ray Kolish, and Ed, because Jolene understands the government affairs, the water issues, but also understands the issues associated very specifically with the water retailer at Eastern. So welcome, Jolene. Our next person is Ray Kolish. Ray is a bit more of a local. Ray is the general manager for 29 Palms Water District. So Ray has worked his way up from someone that's installed pipe all the way up to the general manager, literally has been the boots on the ground, and understands the ins and outs of what some of the new legislation means to a smaller retailer. And I think many of you in this room can identify with that. So with our group identified, I think what I'll do is just jump right into the questions. And I'll start with Ed, since Ed is the larger-than-life presence here. Ed, could you tell us about your role with KP Public Affairs, and what are the ways, the good and the bad, that you've seen the legislative environment change over the years? I know it's gone both ways. We often think negative, but there has been good and bad.
Thank you. It's nice to have such elevated status, even if it's virtual. The legislature has changed in several ways over the years. And I think when I first moved to Sacramento to do lobbying full-time, and during that time, the focus of my practice has been largely on resource issues, including water, energy, environment. And when I first started, there were sort of lions of the legislature who were deeply embedded and spent careers on water policy. People like Jim Costa, who's now in Congress, or Dave Kelly, who was from the Riverside area, who's a rancher. These were folks, Republicans and Democrats, who were steeped in the water issues and had tremendous expertise. And then we went through a period of term limits, which really gutted the level of sophistication and understanding of water policy, because people were here for a very limited amount of time, and water policy was not the sexy thing that people wanted to spend time on. That, of course, changed for limited periods of time, like in a severe drought. But now that we're back to, we've changed the term limits law, so members of the assembly, for example, can serve 12 full years. I think you're starting to see some benefits of people having, the ability to get some long-term expertise. So those are some of the manifestations of the legislature itself, and obviously there are some other trends that I could comment on, but basically I'll talk more about it. But there's been one, I think, overriding trend in water, but not unique to water, is the willingness of the legislature to delegate extraordinary authority to the regulatory agencies in a way that is somewhat unprecedented and certainly did not happen earlier in my career. And that has had some unintended consequences and some cause of some concern, legitimate concern, about the role of Sacramento vis-a-vis local water agencies.
Thank you, Ed. Moving over to Jolene, could you tell us a little about yourself, your role at Eastern, and then similarly, how you've seen the legislative and regulatory field change over your career?
Sure, thank you. Tom provided a great introduction. I wanted to start by saying I haven't spent much time in the high desert, but I have been so completely warmed by the high desert hospitality, both from your staff and others I've met today. So thank you all for having me here today. It's a pleasure. So as Tom mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Public and Governmental Affairs at Eastern Municipal Water District. We're a water, wastewater, and recycled water provider about an hour and a half southeast of here. We cover about 555 square miles, so we're kind of dwarfed compared to your service area in terms of geographic coverage, but we do serve over 800,000 people in our area. My particular role oversees public affairs, media affairs, social media, intergovernmental relations, as well as the state and federal legislative programs, so kind of the whole overarching outreach. That also includes our K-12 education program. We feel really strongly about starting with our youth to instill the messages of water conservation and the value of tap water. Otherwise, outside of work, I have an 8-year-old daughter who I greatly enjoy my adventures with. But in terms of things that I have noticed in terms of a change since I've been at Eastern, which I started there in 2000, Ed kind of stole some of my ideas already. So, but definitely water you expect to be a nonpartisan topic. I would say over the last decade or so, there's been a shift in that. Senator Kelly, who was already mentioned, was one of our leaders from our area who had a real talent for working across the aisle to accomplish the priorities for Californians. And it just seems like that working across the aisle to accomplish common goals seems to be less common. In terms of a regulatory arena, this was also already mentioned, but it does seem like the shift of control from the local agency to a regulatory level has continued to increase, especially in the recent years, whether it be on topics like water use efficiency and how we implement that at a local level, down to things like how we can and cannot use natural gas for reciprocating engines to power our system. A lot of that local control is definitely being shifted elsewhere. On a positive, I think all of these efforts, whether they be at the legislative or the regulatory level, it gives us the opportunity to engage. It gives us the opportunity to meet all the people who are involved, to build relationships with all the people who are involved, and it really gives us that opportunity to participate in the process.
Thank you. Ray, same question, a little about yourself and how you've seen the landscape, regulatory, legislative change over your career.
Well, first off, thank you, Tom, for inviting me to this forum. This gives a different perspective from a smaller agency. We in 29 Palms, we're an 86 square mile district. We have about 200 miles of pipe, but we only have about 8,000 service connections. We only have 20 employees. So in comparison to a larger agency like Eastern, our challenges are great with limited resources. Again, Ray Kolish, 29 Palms Water. I've been with the agency for 25 years now and seen a lot of changes over the years. When I was asked to be the general manager back in 2015, I was thinking to myself, okay, it's not too bad. I'm an operational guy. Water districts are very operational. I was wrong. The change that I've seen in the last 5 years and the impacts that it's made to our agencies, regulations. Our agency is 100% groundwater, and with groundwater comes water quality challenges. As we see some of the regulations coming out of Sacramento and how it affects a community like ours, we're 100% disadvantaged, and 75% of that is severely disadvantaged. So anything that is impacted, what impacts the district, it greatly impacts our ratepayers. So I realized that we have to be more involved. The district just can't sit back and not have our voice heard in Sacramento. And we're somewhat newcomers to the legislative arena. We're limited again in resources, but we're trying to get other agencies involved that like 29 Palms to have more of a voice in Sacramento, to let the legislators know what our problems are from a small system like 29 Palms. So a lot of changes over the years.
Thank you. Next question to Ed, and I think we'll drill down with more local issues as a follow-up. But Ed, what do you see as the greatest challenges facing water agencies throughout California at this time?
There's a couple issues that are playing out in Sacramento that I think sort of explain or are examples of the things that Jolene and I referenced. One, I think the overriding challenge for water agencies in this environment is there are two pressures at once, and I don't think policymakers I know they haven't come to grips with it fully, which is, one, the entire water delivery system was built on assumptions and modeling for flows at certain times of years, pre-climate change, and I don't think we've fully come to grips with the adaptation issues that we need to in terms of water supply challenges moving forward, and the need to think differently on a holistic level about the water delivery system, and to do the changes, physical changes necessary to accommodate it. We are very good on talking about and adopting policies on climate change that relate to reducing emissions. We are not very good at all on focusing on climate change adaptation. And, the secret, dirty little secret is we could go to zero carbon emissions, and many of the fundamental changes in terms of snow melt, et cetera, and the way the plumbing is designed will remain. So that's big picture. That's one thing that we're still grappling with. At the same time, we're implementing laws like this Groundwater Management Act, which will restrict the ability to use groundwater in the way that we have, where we have really overtaxed groundwater basins. Now, Mojave is actually an example of a well-managed groundwater basin, which was adjudicated, and of course, I like to think Mojave is a great example of a lot of good things in water policy. But not everyone is in as good a shape as Mojave, and so on the one hand, you have constrained deliveries of surface water due to the conditions in the Delta, change in climate, et cetera, and on the other hand, you're being constrained in terms of your groundwater asset. The other issue that comes to the forefront right now, too, that come to mind immediately that we're dealing with in the legislature is, from my perspective, seeing Sacramento operate historically on water and watching local agencies, Candidly, local agencies have been ahead of Sacramento when it comes to water recycling, water conservation, how to be efficient, how to use ratepayer money efficiently. We have some of the best thought leaders in the country, if not the world, on these issues, and Mojave is a perfect example of it. Sacramento has gotten into the game late, and then there's a tendency, especially at the state water board, to overcorrect, to think, well, you know, we're here to save all of you. And of course, they're late to the game and they don't have the same knowledge you have. And so their effort to save is sometimes misguided. And whether we've struggled on water conservation, we've worked hard on legislation to make permanent some of the savings that were put in place by water agencies during the drought. But it's been a difficult process to try to explain how water agencies make decisions and that we're already doing great things, that the legislation doesn't need to give the water board too much authority to micromanage operations. The other thing is the water tax, the drinking water tax, which is proposed, where the state wants to take local ratepayer money and reallocate that to communities that don't have adequate drinking water. I could spend an hour telling you why that's a bad idea, but I won't, except to say that there are other alternatives. Jolene's agency has developed one of those, AB 2050. There are other financing alternatives, but the idea of taxing drinking water across the state, give to the water board to solve an endemic problem in parts of the Central Valley for communities who certainly need help. But that's a really bad idea and a bad way to go about it. And it's an exhibit, really, of this tension between the water agencies candidly doing a very good job and being out front on a lot of issues, and Sacramento sort of leading from behind and trying to impose all sorts of new mandates and conditions. There are times when those mandates are appropriate, and there are times when they are better informed by local decisions. So,
thank you, Ed. Maybe going straight to the smaller system, Ray, what are key regulatory and/or legislative issues that your agency struggles with today?
Regulatory issues like water quality, and I'm sure you'll hear me talk about water quality issues. You know, 29 Palms is unique where we have a high naturally occurring fluoride. We spend a lot of money to remove fluoride from our drinking water. And then down the line came the arsenic rule. I was engaged in a little bit of a conversation right before this. We were talking about when the arsenic rule came out, there's levels that the arsenic was at, 50 parts per million. And then when a regulation changed, the next day they go down to 10 parts per million, and we're out of violation. And the public perception is now we're serving water that is unsafe, even though it's the same water that's been served for 50 years. Those are very tough challenges because the treatment for these constituents are very expensive. They're very complex, and they're geared to the specific constituent that you're removing. We have one of our wells, for instance, we're going to have 3 separate treatment systems: fluoride, arsenic, and the anticipation of chrome-6 when they redevelop that NCL. And keeping water conservation in mind, you know, we try to choose treatment systems that don't have a high loss of water. You know, sometimes people talk about reverse osmosis, and that's the solve all problems. But when you have a high waste stream for that, that makes this challenging. So the treatment processes that we have to choose make an impact on our community. Legislatively, Ed mentioned it, things like the water tax. You know, we look at the water tax, while I may have good intentions, the unintended consequences to an agency like 29 Palms is that we're taking that money away locally to solve our own problems. How do we get that money back? It's unclear. And how does that tie our hands for managers when we go to do rate increases? People always remember the slight rate increase they may have had a year or two before, even though it wasn't imposed by our agency. So we feel it ties our hands sometimes on how we have to manage our district. I'll never forget the day we were going through a rate increase a couple years ago, and it equated to, I think, about $1.50 a month. And we had one ratepayer come in and says, well, that equates to 20 packages of top ramen. That's the type of impact any rate increase in our community makes. So our board of directors are very conscious of that. We do what we can, but the pressures are on us extremely to keep our water affordable. And that's another topic in the state right now is affordable water. And it's getting very challenging for agencies like 29 Palms.
Jolene, same question. Current struggles, regulatory, legislative? Or
perspective. We've all been doing all we can to implement water use efficiency, reduce demand. We have been extremely effective at reducing demand over the past couple of decades, actually. Most recently, the most recent drop was most recent with the drought declaration. Our agency is 50% dependent on imported supplies. About a third of our supplies are from recycled water, and then we also rely on desalted groundwater, and then a small percentage of just regular untreated groundwater. This all connects here because as we've reduced demand, that has had serious implications on our recycled water system. Not only has it created less recycled water supply that we use in agriculture and in golf courses and on parks and any non-functional, any non-potable purpose. So not only has all of these conservation efforts reduce the amount of supply of our recycled water, but it has greatly increased the concentration of salts and other elements in the recycled water that almost challenge the sustainability of our recycled water program. So not only that, but the increased concentration of salts and other elements make the water, the wastewater more corrosive, so just managing our sewer system is becoming more expensive. On the regulatory front, when your wastewater or your recycled water has higher salts, there's an additional regulatory burden because we can't meet the limits of our permits when that water is that much saltier. So kind of starting with the operational. And then in terms of the legislative and regulatory, I think it's kind of been mentioned a couple times now, but both the legislature and the State Water Resources Control Board are very focused on implementing the human right to water, which we absolutely support the intention of. The water affordability, the low-income rate structures, all of these things are very important, and we want to be part of the solution. We think this is absolutely important. In this day and age, we all need to work together to come up with solutions to address these issues. We just need to protect our ratepayers in the process. Much of our service area is also disadvantaged, so when it comes to the concept of adding an extra dollar on the water bill, that makes a difference. One of the pieces of legislation that's being debated right now is a shutoff bill that would prevent our agency, any water agency, under certain circumstances, from shutting off water service to a customer for non-payment. Well, that definitely helps out the customer who is not paying because they still get the benefit of the water without having to pay. But then that impacts the affordability for all of our other customers because we would then have to take that amount that those customers aren't paying and redistribute that among the rest of our customers, thereby impacting the affordability for all of the other customers who are paying their water bill. So it's just, there's a lot of dynamics that we're having to balance on both this regulatory and legislative front. And we want to solve all of these problems, but not in a way that is that detrimentally impacts our ratepayers. Our ratepayers have invested in a solid system for 5 going on 6 decades, and it's really unfair to ask more of them to pay for issues that may not really be theirs to solve.
Good answers. Well, I am still in the first year of my position here in the high desert, and within that year, I've had the pleasure to meet our representatives from state assembly to the state senate, and I was, not to mention our county supervisors. And I was quite pleased with the response I received. They all said, we are here listening, we're here to help, give me a call, let me know how I can help you. So feeding into that, and Ray, we'll start with you. If you could make one legislative change, maybe in the process itself, it's going to happen, and it's Ray's bill, or it's Ray's process, Ray's step. What would it be?
I think it's important for the legislators to understand, why we may be introducing a bill or the problems we're trying to solve locally. I think it was mentioned earlier, it's hard when some of these regulatory and legislative bills are introduced that it's not a blanket. It affects agencies differently. And again, unintended consequences. I also would like to see some accountability for the State Water Resources Control Board from the legislators. Have the legislators create objectives for the State Water Board. I think that's very important because, again, I think the impacts that it makes, especially on small agencies, are huge. And, one of the examples that 29 Palms is going through, and it's very difficult, we applied for a grant 3 years ago for a planning and engineering grant. 3 years ago, we started the process. And here we are, still waiting for some help. And that's tough. I hope in the future there's a more streamlined process for grants. It's one of the reasons the State Water Resources Control Board kind of took over the Department of Health. The Department of Health, the State Water Board did not feel, the State Water Board did not feel that the Department of Health was issuing the grant money fast enough. Well, here we are years later, and we're still waiting. I don't think that problem's been solved. And again, I think for disadvantaged communities and small communities like us, we're learning the process of the grants and how we may be more effective. But it takes engagement. Again, another thing that's been talked about, just engagement, involved with our state assembly members, our senators. That way they fully understand our problems, and hopefully they can help.
So if I hear you correctly, it's something like more accountability for the process, regulatory process, legislative process relative to the diversity of California, kind of where you're located climate-wise, what you look like size-wise, things like that?
Correct. And I'll bring up another example, and it brings a little heartburn to me. When we had the drought regulations a couple years ago, here an agency like 29 Palms is 100% groundwater. And we're asked to reduce our water. Again, this is a regulation statewide. And we're in a community where, and I have to thank Don Bartz from Phelan Pinyon Hills. I know he's not here today, I don't think, but Don is known in Sacramento as the swamp cooler or the evaporative cooler guy in Sacramento. Because when these regulations came out for drought, agencies like 29 Palms were very vocal and say, well, wait a minute. For our customers in the desert who are already very conscious, water conscious and conserving water, now you're asking us to reduce 28% more. But our water use in the summertime is not because of increased turf. We people in the desert, we don't mow lawns, we rake our sand to make it look nice. And that's hard for my relatives back in New York to understand, what we do. But, swamp coolers use an extremely amount of water. We did a little study in 29 Palms where when the conditions are right, 10 gallons per hour, 10 gallons per hour, a swamp cooler can use when the conditions are right. So when we're asked to cut back 28%, now it becomes a health and safety issue. So again, it's the state understanding the problems, and it's not a blanket regulation. It affects agencies different in many ways.
Thanks. Jolene, same question. If you could make a change, what would it be?
So I have two quick answers. One is a change on the state legislative level. Bills that have serious implications to Californians statewide need to be vetted through the normal legislative process where they go through all the policy committees and they can be vetted properly. Over the past several years, I've noticed this trend where we kind of, if something has a certain level of priority, it skips the legislative process entirely. It's inserted into a budget trailer bill where it really doesn't get the discussion and the proper vetting that a lot of these issues that impact every one of us really deserves. So on the state side, I would say, let's let legislation go through the normal process, get the vetting it deserves. On the federal side, in 2011, they implemented a moratorium on earmarks, and all congressionally directed spending came to a halt. That has caused so many other issues, one of which is there's not a normal budget process in DC anymore. This last year, we just wrapped up FY18 cycle as we were already talking about FY19 cycle. So my one thing on the federal front would be get back to a normal budget cycle, have the Senate and House bills and the Senate and House conference done, wrapped up, introduce and pass a budget by October 1st. And I think we can get back to that normal cycle by reintroducing the concept of congressionally directed spending. Our members of Congress know our communities, know our agencies so much better than the federal agencies that are currently distributing funding that that process, we think, just makes more sense.
I was going to skip Ed. I don't think he's got a position or opinion on this one.
Not at
you
all.
Probably have a list carrying around in your jacket pocket every day. What change would you make, Ed? I think I'm quite curious.
I don't know where to start. In all seriousness, actually, the one thing that I was going to mention is what Jolene mentioned. She stole my thunder after I stole her. So you shouldn't be doing major policies in the budget. And the administration, this administration, to their credit, it's to their credit if you benefit from it, not so much if you don't, have chosen to do major policy initiatives in the budget trailer bill process, which means it's a bill attached to the budget, which generally is viewed as a must-pass bill by majority vote. And they've tried to do significant policy where they knew they would have a rough road going through the normal legislative process and tried to circumvent the normal process, hearing process, by going through the budget. And the drinking water tax is a perfect example where last year SB 623 was amended in the Assembly, in the second House, to put the tax in, and ran into problems. And rather than have that bill go through the normal process or start out with a new bill, the administration decided to try to stick it into the budget. Ultimately, I'm hopeful that we will prevail on that, but it really is an abuse of the process. And secondly, I do think that if for those of you who've been to Sacramento and experienced the hearing, unfortunately, the legislature tends to have the same habits as my kids did when they were teenagers in high school, which is procrastination. And they wait till the last hearing to hear all the important bills, which means the hearing goes from morning till night. And the legislature gives each witness 2 minutes, regardless of the nature or importance of the bill. And the legislative process would benefit tremendously from finding the bills that have significant policy implications and spending more time on them. They would make better decisions. Constituents would feel that they have a better voice in the process, and I think everyone would benefit.
Next question is for Jolene, and it may be one of the, I don't know, maybe one of the most important questions, I think, with our audience here today. many of them are associated with water agencies in one way or another. With your position, working for an agency, advocating at the federal and state level, what would you recommend to water agencies? What's the best way what should a water agency do to best benefit their customers and residents?
I think the first tip would be to engage with like-minded entities to form coalitions, really use all the services and resources that any of your associations have to offer, especially when it comes to advocacy and toolkits that they provide. Engage in Sacramento to the extent you can. It's a trek up there, but having a presence there is more important than ever before, I think. The other thing is, don't assume that your decision makers and lawmakers know who you are. Every water agency is so unique in its mission, its geographic uniqueness, the services it provides, the demographics, the challenges we all have. Don't assume they know that. Make the time to, and with term limits, we know we get new legislators representing us on a pretty frequent cycle now. So really reach out, make sure on the state and federal level, your representatives know your agency, know what's important to your agency, know your agency's priorities. And on the flip side, I think there's a lot of value in taking the time to understand their priorities and understanding what's important to them, and where it works, how you can help them. I think there's a lot of value in two-way relationships there.
Great, good answer, very good answer. Okay, most of the time I'm an optimist, and we've vetted a little bit about policy and regulations today. To kind of wrap up this panel discussion, maybe start with you, Ray. Tell us about a success story, either one from your agency or one that you've observed that you'd like to replicate within the regulatory and or legislative process.
I'll bring up the topic of Chromium 6. Chromium 6, when that regulation came out, made, a huge impact on a lot of agencies across the state. The state failed to do an economic feasibility study for the treatment of Chromium 6. 29 Palms was engaged in the coalition that gave some information to the courts of the true cost of treating for Chromium 6. 29 Palms is known for some innovative technology when it comes to fluoride treatment and arsenic. We did a lot of work with arsenic, and we were featured in the AWWA Journal back in May of 2017, and how we can reduce costs for some of these treatment processes that are out there. So to be involved, again, from a small agency, I reflect back, again, coming up through the ranks of the district, and I go, wow, why weren't we more involved with some of these regulations and these decisions in Sacramento that impact our district? Is it because we don't know how to engage? We're scared to death to go up to Sacramento? I don't know. I never thought I would become a frequent flyer with Southwest Airlines, but I'm becoming that. And but I think it's important for us to also work with other agencies, and I'll echo the sentiment that Jolene said, that we work together. We have to work together. Agencies like 29 Palms, we're limited in our resources, but if we can work together with other agencies that have similar problems and have a more representative voice in Sacramento that better represents our issues, I think is going to be very beneficial. But again, the Chromium 6 was something that we were engaged with. We got involved because the impacts to our district and the invalidation of the Chromium 6 was big for a lot of agencies. There's a lot of perception out there that we don't care about water quality and providing safe water, but it's not about that. It's about the true cost to our ratepayers for some of these regulations that are coming down. So we were happy to be involved with that. We also want to be at the table when these regulations are being developed. If the state engages agencies and stakeholders that, the operators of these systems, the true operators of some of these treatment processes, I think that could help with the development of MCLs. They have to go hand in hand. The regulations and the MCLs have to go hand in hand with the technologies that are out there that make it affordable. So the Chrome 6 was something that we were involved with.
Thanks. Jolene, same question, success stories you've observed?
Mine is going to be not quite a success story, but we're hoping it'll be a success story very soon, which is Ed had mentioned that Eastern Municipal Water District is co-sponsoring a bill that would take a different look at the human right to water issue and would provide kind of an alternative to SB 623, the water tax. Our perspective is that we absolutely support the goal of providing clean, safe water to these people in these failing systems who are currently not being delivered clean, safe water. We just want to make sure we go about that in the most sustainable way possible. So we have co-sponsored AB 2050. The author is Ana Caballero. We've co-sponsored this with California Municipal Utilities Association. And the concept of this bill is to address the governance of these failing, chronically failing water systems first. The state board has identified 331 of these chronically failing water systems around the state. Over 80% of these systems serve 1,000 people or fewer. So they're very small systems. They don't have the benefit of the economy of scale. So the concept of this bill would be to create a small system water authority, which would actually be a new section in the water code, creating a new type of special district where many of these failing systems would come together to form a much larger agency that would have the economy of scale to fund some of these really expensive treatment processes, the treatment infrastructure. And with that, you would reduce the overhead. So instead of having, nothing wrong with general managers, but instead of having 10 general managers, you're going to be paying for one. Instead of having multiple finance departments, multiple water quality laboratories, you have the benefit of a lot less overhead once you bring all these systems together. And then you have the technical, financial, and managerial expertise to make these systems sustainable. It's going to take an infusion of money for the first few years to get these systems up to speed. The state board has a role. The LAFCOs have a role. There's going to be an administrator to kind of form these systems. So it will take an investment up front, but the goal is that once these systems are up and running, they'll be sustainable. Right now, the water tax is proposing to take money from all water customers around the state to prop up failing water systems in perpetuity to pay for O&M. We're not certain that's the best use of our ratepayer dollars. So this just provides another alternative, another tool in the toolbox that puts the foundation and the governance first. There's a process to reevaluate to see how that works after it's been in place for a time. Then evaluate any extra needs to help subsidize or fund ongoing O&M, but fix the foundation first.
Thank you. Ed, I'm going to ask you to kind of bring us on home with the last question. You have many clients, and I hope you've seen many successes. Could you tell us about a success and maybe how those in the audience here could use successful strategies for themselves?
Sure. Well, first, I'm glad to hear the water quality example on Chrome 6. Actually, my partner, Jeff Sickinger, has led that coalition effort for a number of years on the regulatory side, and that was a good outcome, and we're still working on it. And it was great to hear Don Bartz's name, because we've helped Rosamond on their water quality stuff as well. And so I think the example beyond the water quality side, and Not surprisingly, it involves Mojave, but it is an example I've used over the years, among many others, in a lot of different contexts. But if you wait for Sacramento to lead, I think you'll be very disappointed. If you wait for others to solve problems for you, you may not like the solution. And so I have encouraged my clients and have worked with Mojave over the years to try to come up with organic solutions at the local level that then can be brought to Sacramento. Jolene just gave an example of one. A prime example of this is the way Mojave organized around the principle of integrated regional water management plans well over a decade ago. I think I've been representing Mojave for over a decade. It doesn't seem like that, but I think it's over a decade now. Basically knew that integrated regional water management plans at the time were a voluntary exercise, but we plotted out a strategy because we knew it was going to evolve beyond that it might be a mandate, and that there was bond money starting to be thought about and provided for communities that develop these plans. And so the integrated plans really became an opportunity for Mojave to work collectively within the region. The adjudication was just finished up. It was about to be implemented. And this notion of getting all the agencies together, doing an EIR, doing a plan, prioritizing for the community as a whole, not all the projects directly benefited Mojave, served us tremendously well. And we were able to shape legislation and the regulations on integrated plans because we were putting it into practice. We went to Sacramento proactively, got money in at least two water bonds, helped write the language for the water bonds on that section because we were out front. We were a leader. We were coming to Sacramento with the practical experience, and we were advocating for the solution that other people wanted and explaining to them how best to incent local agencies to use the tool. And that resulted in money in numerous grant cycles. At this point, we've probably gotten, I don't know how much money. We got $25 million in the first grant cycle. I believe we got another in the second. And we've worked with your staff over the years to get more. But I think the lesson is what you're doing at the local level is valuable. Your experience, whether it be on water quality or water supply, don't assume people in Sacramento understand the problem in the way that you do, and bring the solution to the table. I two little vignettes. One of my mentors, my boss who started this firm, he used to jokingly say, Ed, when they're going to run you out of town, make sure you're leading the parade. And the translation for that is, if they're going to try and impose a water tax, drinking water tax, you don't like it, but instead of just saying no, tell them how to really fix the problem. And the other vignette is a client who always used to tell me that when he was a young professional working for a home builder, he came in and complained to the founder of the company about how difficult the local entitlement process was, and the city council was torturing him. And he went on, and the founder of the company looked at him and said, "Are you done?" And he said, "What do you mean?" "Yeah, I guess I'm done." He said, "Next time you come in the room, Jim, give me the cure, not the disease." And so a lot of what we do, what we like to think about in terms of coming to Sacramento is to give them our complaints and hope they'll solve the problem. And the one thing I can tell you is if you come to Sacramento with, it's okay to tell them the complaint, but give them the cure, give them the solution, And you will be surprised at how far you can drive policy in Sacramento to benefit you and your region, because the local water agencies down in the high desert are amongst the thought leaders in how to use a resource that's critically important, and how to provide leadership to the state and to get the most value and the most protection for ratepayers, while at the same time valuing water resources and committing to the future of the state. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ed. So I think you heard it. Find the cure, get engaged, go to Sacramento with an answer. I think Ed, Jolene, Ray, thank you very much for participating. I hope everybody here, well, first, thank you, too. I hope you get a couple of nuggets to go back to your community, your agency, your city, that make you think a little bit more about what you can do to solve your problems, come up with your cure. Before we go, I did also want to say, well, also thank you to our other speakers, Ellen, Charlie, thank you very much for your perspectives. Also, Catherine Abbott, the Executive Director of Victor Valley College Foundation, and her staff. Tyler Bush, Victor Valley College Restaurant Manager. You all enjoyed the food outside, as well as his team. Nancy Christian, Victor Valley College PAC, and her team. ENM Media and High Desert Digital, thank you very much. And not to mention Yvonne Hester, Gloria Golicki, all the MWA staff running around, making sure people know how to park and had parking permits, making sure everything goes smoothly. So thank you all for making this work. It's been fun. I hope to see you the next time we do this. Thank you.